What's going on, guys? The CTA Prime back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the all-new Handheld Game Station. Now, if you're familiar with the Handheld Pandoras boxes, this is pretty much running the same operating system as some of the 3D Pandoras boxes. So basically, we have a portable handheld Pandoras box here. So I was lucky enough to pick up all three colors, and I will be doing a giveaway very soon, so keep an eye on the channel. But overall, I love the design of this new handheld unit. The D-pad on this thing is a bit awkward, and we'll get into that in just a second. It might be a deal breaker for a lot of people, but you can get used to it. I personally wish they would have added a traditional D-pad, but I guess they wanted to be different with this. One thing that this handheld really has going for it is the display. It's only 3.5 inches, but it does seem a little bigger than that. It's IPS, 640 by 480, and it looks absolutely beautiful. But as you can see, they offer three different colors: the yellow, orange, white, and the blue. I'm personally partial to the blue version here, but they all function exactly the same. So the first thing that's going to stand out to a lot of people is the absence of a traditional D-pad, and I really wish they would have added one here. It would have made the experience a lot better, but like I mentioned, you can get used to this little rocker D-pad. Personally, I prefer using the analog stick on this unit since the D-pad isn't traditional, but the analog stick works well enough, and it definitely reminds me of the Nintendo Switch. Other than the makeshift D-pad and the analog stick, we also get A, B, X, Y, C, D, Home, Start, and Select. There are no buttons on the back of this unit, so you will have to substitute one of the front buttons for your triggers. Over on the left-hand side, we have our power button plus an LED indicator. This will let us know that the unit is charging or powered up. On the right-hand side, we have our volume rocker for volume up and down. And on the very top of the unit, we have a micro HDMI out, 3.5mm audio jack for headphones, SD card slot, and our micro USB for charging. In my opinion, the way this thing's laid out, it was designed for arcade games, MAME, FBA, Neo Geo, and things like that. But it does support PSP, Dreamcast, N64, SNES, Mega Drive, PC Engine, like I mentioned, MAME, FBA, Neo Geo, and a few others. Don't expect this to run every Dreamcast and PSP game at full speed, but it does do a pretty good job with a lot of the lower end stuff. It's got a really nice user interface, and if you've ever messed around with any of the Pandoras boxes, you'll be used to this. It has a search function, a category function, so you can get to whatever game you want to play pretty easily from the main menu. And all in all, this unit is actually running a modified version of Android. And with an external keyboard, I was actually able to enter the Android settings, so we'll take a look at that by the end. But for this video, I just kind of want to give you an idea of what this thing can really do. Anywhere you find these online, the specs are going to be kind of vague, so I wanted to pull this thing apart and see exactly what CPU this is running. Now, I do know that this is running some sort of modified version of Android, and I'm 100% sure about that, but I'm not sure what CPU this thing has. So the battery is a bit bigger than advertised. They say 4500 mAh. This is a 5000 mAh battery, but it won't make much of a difference in runtime. So the whole thing seems to be put together quite well, and if we get down here to the CPU itself, and it looks like it's running the Mediatek 6580A. This is a quad-core CPU at 1.3 GHz, and there's no cooling on this chip whatsoever right out of the box, so maybe modifying it and adding a heatsink would help out with long play sessions. As for RAM, I will have to run the numbers on these chips just to see what we're working with here. Looks like we have a quad-core 1.3 GHz CPU with a Mali 400 MP2 GPU at 500 MHz, 512 MB of DDR3 RAM, a 3.5-inch IPS display at 640 by 480. There's no screen tearing whatsoever. This is running at 60 Hz. And it does have built-in Wi-Fi. It's only 802.11bgn, so we don't get AC, and we can't pick up that 5 GHz network, but I have heard rumor that this can do net play from unit to unit, and this should work out fine as long as you're on the same network. So we're not working with super high-end specs here, but this should be more than enough to get all the arcade, SNES, PC Engine, Mega Drive, and tons of other lower-end emulators running at full speed. So I have a lot to show off with this device, so I'm probably going to break this up into two videos, but I got a lot in this one here. This is kind of the initial overview. We'll test out some PSP, Dreamcast, PlayStation 1, GBA, Mega Drive, and some MAME. So getting to the game you want to play on this device is quite easy. There's a category up here. We can go through systems, so we have PSP, N64, Dreamcast, PlayStation 1, PC Engine, Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, MAME, and FBA. Now, if we hold the home button on the device, we can actually get into the menu settings. So we'll just hold this for about 3 seconds. It'll bring us right in. This is where we can access Wi-Fi. We can remap the buttons, change the brightness, sleep setting, and mess around with the external controllers if you want to plug one in through the micro USB port on the very top. There's an I/O test here, And we also have a game market. Now, this device isn't accessing the game market for some reason. It says it's not registered, and I'm not exactly sure if the game market is even up and running right now, but this should allow you to go through and download games. But when I go into the menu, it tells me that I'm not registered, so there's nothing I can do here. So now it's time to see how this thing performs. Now the CPU in this is not a high-end CPU by any means whatsoever, but it should be able to play some lower-end PSP, Dreamcast, and it should definitely handle PlayStation 1. So first up, we'll get into a little bit of PSP. So first up, we have the Power Stone Collection, and I can tell you right off the bat that this actually has some frame skip going on, so it's not super fluid, but it is playable here. The lower-end PSP games should be able to run on this pretty well, like Ratchet & Clank and other games like that, but don't expect it to run God of War at full speed. Now, one thing a lot of people are going to have trouble with when they first get their unit is the button layout. Now, you will get used to it. I mean, you can get used to anything, but it will take a little bit of time. I wanted to try another fast-paced PSP game, so this is Ridge Racer 2, and I've played this a lot in emulation and on the original PSP. This has a lot of frame skip going on. The game feels a lot slower than it should be. Now with each system, we do have a save function, so if you press the home button, it'll bring up our menu, and you can press the corresponding button to save the game. Now PSP does take a lot longer than the lower-end systems to save, but it does work. We can also load from that menu also. Next up, we have some Dreamcast emulation, and this is Marvel vs. Capcom 2. It's actually running a lot better than I thought it would on this device. And there are some graphical glitches going on in the background due to the emulator being used. But overall, 2D Dreamcast games should run pretty good on this device. For a lower end system, so this is PS1 running Tekken 3. I don't think there's any frame skip going on, and this is definitely running it at full speed. Feels great here, and I'm pretty sure this is running at a constant 60 FPS. I suspected this chip would definitely handle PlayStation 1. But Tekken 3 isn't the hardest PS1 game to emulate, so we'll move over to a little more demanding PS1 game, Bloody Roar 2. So far so good. Bloody Roar 2 is running at a really nice speed here. This is a harder to emulate PS1 game, especially for these lower end chips, but it seems to be handling it just fine. So with the higher end stuff out of the way, let's move on to some lower end emulation. This is Game Boy Advance, and I figured straight out of the box this thing would handle GBA fine, and this is Sonic Advance, running great. And of course I had to test out one of my favorite games. This is Altered Beast, Sega Genesis or Mega Drive depending on where you are in the world, and it looks like this system's going to handle Mega Drive and Genesis just fine. So one thing that a lot of people are going to be worried about is the D-pad. Now you can get used to it, and I did miss a few of these special moves here using the D-pad, but overall it actually works better than I thought it would when I first saw this. Even though it works quite well when you get used to it, I still wish they would have added a traditional D-pad to this unit. So after fiddling around with this thing for a little while, I was actually able to enter the Android settings. I knew it was running Android, but I wasn't sure what version it was running. And this does have Bluetooth built in. Unfortunately, it can only be accessed through the Android settings menu. I just plugged in a little USB wireless keyboard and I was able to drag down from the top here. And come to find out, it's actually running Android 6.0 with a really old security patch. So luckily we don't have any browsers built into this thing. But Bluetooth is accessible from this menu here, and I was able to pair a couple different controllers, but unfortunately it wouldn't work with the games. So in the next couple days, I will be messing around with the Android operating system built in here. I'm going to try to install a different launcher and different emulators. I mean, we're not going to get much better performance out of different emulators, but I still wanted to mess around with this. I think it's pretty cool to be able to access the Android operating system on this handheld. And as you can see, HDMI out does work, so you can plug this into an HDMI-enabled TV or a monitor like I have here. I do have this controller paired over Bluetooth, but nothing's happening, and even through the key mapping system in the menu, I cannot map this controller. So that's something else I'll look into in the next coming days. So in the end, it's definitely not a high-end handheld, but it does work well for the older stuff, especially FBA, MAME, Sega Genesis, SNES, and even some 2D Dreamcast games. So as for pricing on these things, I actually overspent a little bit at $120 a piece on these, and I will be giving 2 of these away in an upcoming video, so definitely stay tuned to the channel. But the street price on these should be around $80 to $100 as soon as everybody starts getting them in stock, so definitely keep an eye on different sites like eBay, Amazon, and AliExpress. If you're interested in picking one up now for a little more, I will leave links in the description to where I got mine, but like I said, they should be coming down in price as soon as they start getting into vendors' hands. I personally really like the design of this thing. Now, if I had to change one thing, it would be that D-pad and possibly add some trigger buttons on the rear, but I've been able to get by with no triggers at all. It's just really that weird D-pad. But like you saw, it does work and you can get used to it. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I really appreciate you watching. Keep an eye on the channel because I will have a couple more coming on this unit. I think it's a really interesting little handheld, and I'm just waiting on a few updates to be released for this thing. If you have any questions or you want to see anything else running on this handheld, just let me know in the comments below. But like always, thanks for watching.